wouldn't have the ability to use machinery, light bulbs, internet, because of the economics of bringing energy to people. Bitcoin fixes this.
Yeah, and I think it really does all boil down to money, politics, and who's backed by who, and so it gets real messy real fast, but I do think that eventually there's going to be enough evidence out there.
A US bank account, a very unique thing to have in this world, and I don't think most people realize what kind of friction it introduces in your life when you don't have that, and how many of those problems Bitcoin solves for people that are in that situation. Welcome back to the Abundant Minds podcast. Today we're really excited to have Becca Bratcher on. Becca is an accomplished author and a journalist in the Bitcoin space. She's currently writing for Forbes as well as The Street Crypto. She's the author of 21 Women in Bitcoin, which is a book that is highlighting the powerful contributions of women in the Bitcoin space. And she previously hosted the Bitcoin Brew podcast, and we couldn't be more thrilled to have her on. So thank you for coming, Becca, and welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So we like to start out, if we can, with how you discovered Bitcoin and what your path into the rabbit hole was.
Yeah, for sure. I think like a lot of people, I had a friend tell me about it way back in 2013. And I think we just had like one or two conversations about it, and I definitely wrote it off and thought it was a waste of time. And then fast forward to 2019, my husband started getting really involved with it and started working in the space. And so I started learning more about it. During the lockdown and during COVID, I remember just hearing like bits and pieces of phone calls he would have, and that kind of sparked a lot of questions for me. And so one thing led to another. I read the Bitcoin Standard and I went to a conference in 2021, and the rest is history.
Very cool. And I know you also came into this from kind of a tangential space, which is being a nurse. We don't all have a linear path in or a tech background necessarily, but what made you make a full-on career shift into the Bitcoin space?
Yeah, I think the more I found out about it, the more I realized what an impact it can make in the next generation. I was a pediatric nurse and really did enjoy that career that I had for a while. But I think just learning more about Bitcoin made me realize, like, I really want to teach. We have 3 daughters, and I want to teach them about, money management, how to kind of, in any way possible, kind of not beat the system, but just be smart with like the assets that you have, because it's all been pretty revolutionary for me. So I think that's what made me want to switch.
Do you feel like, you said you had a early exposure and then it took several years before it really made its way back into your life, but once it started to become of interest to you, was it like a light bulb moment and everything clicked, or did you feel like you had to really do the work and that it took many, many hours and lots of repeated study to get in?
Probably more of the latter. Bits and pieces of it would click. I was at a conference. Actually just it was at A&M, and I went to see a friend, but just sat in on one session, and it was on the history of money. And I remember that being a very pivotal moment in understanding what Bitcoin was all about, because I had never really thought about the history of money, like where it came from, why it mattered. I really did think that we were still on a gold standard. That's embarrassing to say, but it's just like a lot of the people that I am around, we don't, look very deep when it comes to money. And so that was definitely an interesting light bulb moment to just realize, like, hey, money can change, and it is changing. And if you want to truly use your money to vote, to, say what's important to you, then it really does matter to really dig in and understand it.
I don't think you're alone. I think most people out there have not yet recognized how money works, and it probably will be a long time before most people recognize it, if ever. And so many people walking around do think we're still on the gold standard. So as embarrassing as it may feel as a Bitcoiner to think that, it's easy to forget that most of the world is not on the same page and has not done the same homework.
Yeah, for sure. I've learned so much about so many different topics since learning about Bitcoin. So
your book is called 21 Women in Bitcoin, and I'm curious, what led you to write specifically about the women in Bitcoin?
Yeah, I had a friend who, the space is definitely more skewed male, which makes sense. Just the topics are more interesting to, engineering, whatever. You can go down that rabbit hole. But a friend of ours was like, hey, we know that you have 3 daughters, you're really interested in Bitcoin, you're very passionate about getting more involved. Why don't you write a book about some women who are in the space and kind of, highlight what they're doing? And so I really thought he was kidding at first. I was like, oh, that's hilarious. Like, what a great joke, Thanks for pointing that out. And then, he was like, no, like, seriously. And he sent me a list of like 4 or 5 women, like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Like, you should really do it. He was really serious about it. And Lee, my husband, was very supportive. And so, yeah, it happened. It took about 2 years in total. But, yeah, it all came together.
And the premise of it is there's 21 women, right? But each one of those women's stories go through a different aspect of Bitcoin itself. And what would be some of the particular aspects that stood out most to you that, whether it connected to the person's personal story or just a particular part of Bitcoin that really kind of changed the way that you see the world?
Yeah, so I really kind of just thought back to how I learned about Bitcoin and started off kind of with the fundamental building blocks, and then we go all the way to cold storage, centralized, decentralized exchanges, and the stuff that is important, but like you have to really be interested to, learn about it, I guess. And so there's 20 women, and then the last one is the reader. So like in hopes that you'll just take what you know and dive in and, contribute to the space or however they want to get involved.
Specifically for amplifying women, I mean, I think it's super important to have diversity of perspective, and you already mentioned, especially in the tech field, it's definitely skewed male. What do you think the importance of having more and more women participate in this space is for the space as well as just for the people themselves?
I don't have a super strong opinion about that. I just, like Natalie Brunell will say this all the time, like I just kind of wanted more friends to hang out with, like when I show up to events and stuff. And it's fun to see the type of contributions that women come up with. It's just maybe a little bit different than what a man might come up with, but it doesn't mean that it's better or whatever. It's just different. So yeah, I don't have like a super strong opinion on that, I guess.
Well, I mean, you hit it, which is it's different, and that means it's going to attract a different set of people. And with something that we believe is so important, I mean, we are trying to onboard the rest of the world to this, right? And more than half of the world is women. So if we don't know how to appeal to more than half of the world, we're doing a pretty terrible job at educating and onboarding the people who it matters to most. Do you feel like there's particular barriers that we still have to overcome for that to be possible? Like, what do you think the challenges are still in getting people to understand what this is?
I mean, it's so crazy because even over the last 6 to 12 months, some of my very best friends who have always kind of poked fun at the fact that I'm into Bitcoin have picked up my book and started reading it and like asking questions about it, which is not about me at all. It's all about the stories of the women in the book and what they've done with it. And so I think it's just easier to talk about Bitcoin, and a lot of women are interested in it. And I think the number one reason is the level of inflation right now in the US especially. I mean, globally it varies, but that's been the number one conversation starter that I've come across. And so I think it's just people are waking up to the fact that the government has so much control over your daily life and kind of what you can do to get involved with that.
What do you think? What do you think our main job is then in bringing these people in? Is it just letting people come to us with the things that concern them, knowing that things like inflation are going to be a topic of conversation for everybody, or is it our job to say, hey, look at this problem? Because there's so many things. I mean, you mentioned thinking that the dollar was backed by gold. Like, there's so many misunderstandings that people have walking around. Is it our job to go out and tell them, hey, you don't get this, or wait for them to come to us? What's your personal opinion on that?
I think Bitcoin is a one-way street in that way. You have to care, you have to be interested, otherwise there's just no motivation. I mean, I don't know how you learned about Bitcoin, but I can probably guess it wasn't because someone just told you about it one day and you're like, oh, I never thought about that. I mean, you have to have a reason to want to get into it. And so I think, the more women coming into the space, which is really happening pretty quickly, the more women will come. So I think it's just a slower process.
Totally agree. And you're right. I and probably anybody who's really fallen down the rabbit hole has some kind of wiring or natural interest that brings them into the space. I would say mine was probably having a family of people who, already believed gold was a great form of money, and that being kind of something that I learned early on to conceptualize and think about. And so that was a pretty natural way in. But everybody's got their own, and maybe the answer to that is whatever is most pressing for that person at that time should be your vehicle in, and that everybody's got a different problem that resonates most with them that Bitcoin has a way of fixing.
Oh yeah, for sure. I would agree with that.
How would most people come into this and they're non-technical, and Bitcoin can be very, very tough to explain to a non-technical audience. How would you balance kind of the storytelling nature of kind of like the story of Bitcoin and getting into some of the more nitty-gritty technical aspects of it with people?
Yeah, I'm definitely not a technical person. I don't know how to code, or I'm pretty technically challenged, to be honest. I just, I think it's like my husband would say, like, people use email all the time and you don't know how it works. You just use it and you know that it's reliable. And I think that is kind of a helpful illustration, because I can explain to you how it works. I mean, I can somewhat explain Bitcoin mining, and I've studied it at different times to really try to grasp the concept of it. But yeah, I mean, I just don't think that you have to be that technical to realize it's really effective. And like some of the stories, like Farida Nabarima, she is an activist for basically women. I mean, yeah, just she's done a lot with contributions in Bitcoin, and realizing that if, the government can shut down funds pretty quickly and they can track them pretty quickly. But with Bitcoin, it really serves a purpose if it's a safety issue, getting women out of a dangerous situation or whatever. And I think that, like, some people don't need to know like the code behind that to realize that it's a useful tool. And so that's kind of where I land on that, knowing that I use a lot of things that I don't understand how they work.
And even if, I mean, to your point, even if you understand a part of it, it's one of those things that goes so deep and touches many things. I mean, being in the mining space, this is especially apparent. Even people who have been in Bitcoin from the beginning may have no understanding about mining and the energy impacts and kind of how the network works on a physical level. And they don't need to in order to get benefit from it. So it's kind of like you can teach to people's interest, but you don't really have to go any further than how it solves their problem, unless you disagree with that.
No, I think that's a really good point. Yeah, that focusing on the problems that it solves is really the most important thing.
So you typically like to contribute in writing, and you've had the opportunity to write for quite a few larger publications. What are some of the things that you've tried to spread the message about as it relates to Bitcoin, and how you've kind of shared the message in these publications?
Yeah, a couple of the things that I really love about Bitcoin is how it really can be a green type of form of energy usage. I totally butchered that, but like all these headlines about, oh, Bitcoin's so bad for the environment, whatever, and then I'm not totally sure about what all energy your company uses, but I know that y'all are pretty environmentally friendly, which I think is amazing. And there's companies like Vespine Energy who use all waste energy, and it's like, I think we're going to trend more and more in that direction. And so that's just something that I feel really passionate about, and I'm learning more about. And so that's very cool. And then obviously just like there's just something to be said about women being in control of their own finances. That comes down to a lot of different things, but I think it's safer for women, it's safer for children, and there's a lot of nuance there. But I love to focus on just the freedom that Bitcoin can bring in that way.
What are some of the stories that you've heard that have made you just go, ah, I'm working on the right thing. I'm sharing the right message. Like it changed this person's life so much. What comes to mind as some of the most impactful stories you've heard?
I would say one of the craziest stories is Warrior Mahbub. She is she was Alex Gladstein wrote about her in his book Check Your Financial Privilege, and basically she started a tech company for women who are Muslim, and she paid them in Bitcoin because before she started doing that, their husbands or fathers would take their paycheck. And so I think just like stories like that, or Farida Namarima, or I mean, honestly, there's so many that are under the radar that are just just so empowering and really can be super life changing. So.
Do you feel like it's lost on most people, especially living in, suburban America, that this has a real impact on the quality of people's lives, not just their financial lives, but actually the level of freedom that they have? That's one of the things that I feel like goes under appreciated and maybe not spoken about as much, but it's probably the most profound impact that actually this has on people's lives, not just number go up technology.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, I think it's really hard to understand. Like we talked about earlier, it's hard to understand, it's hard to know what you don't know. And so I think one of the things that really stood out to me was my husband did his dissertation on land registry or blockchain-based land registry rights. And so to know that in a lot of countries, your land can just be taken from you without any explanation, no monetary compensation, and you really can't do anything about it because there's no way to prove who owns what. But if you have this technology working in your favor, I think it's just a really cool means of adding integrity to building businesses, building families, you know, providing freedom in a lot of ways.
I think it goes unnoticed and until you've had the experience, especially if you're living in the US, like talking about people who are unbanked or underbanked and don't have any kind of financial access. Like we all take it for granted when we use things like Apple Pay and Stripe and all of these modern conveniences that make it so easy to get into a banking system. But a large portion of the world has no access to anything like that. I mean, a US bank account is really a very unique thing to have in this world. And I don't think most people realize what kind of friction it introduces in your life when you don't have that, and how many of those problems Bitcoin solves for people that are in that situation.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, women didn't even have, I don't think they could open their own bank accounts until like 1971, which is not that long ago. So, yeah, I just think we're not that far off from I feel like I take advantage of so many freedoms without even thinking about it. And Bitcoin kind of brings that to light and makes me want to educate more women, especially about, hey, what if, maybe you should just consider this as another method of understanding how money works. So.
And you already mentioned it with, being very green and actually good for our energy systems and for the planet. I mean, one of my personal paths in was I really growing up wanted to be a sustainability engineer. That was kind of the title that I was going for, and had very different views on how energy works than I do now, having been in mining for a few years. And one of the misnomers or things that people still don't understand, but thankfully is shifting, is you hear very often that this is and an industry that is boiling the oceans and ruining our energy systems and extractive in nature and is going to make costs go up for everybody. And it really took a lot of undoing of that wiring to realize that it was perfectly the opposite, that it's one of our most important energy resources, that, it can be extremely effective in lowering costs for people. You mentioned Alex Gladstein. I know he's had a chance to work with the gridless guys in Kenya and show how that functions as the most important energy resource to literally bring them energy. Like they wouldn't have the ability to use machinery, light bulbs, internet, uh, anything of that sort because of the economics of bringing energy to people. That, Bitcoin fixes this is the funny part of that. And I personally look forward to that story being totally undone. But of course, there's still work to do. There's still so many people that haven't even given this an hour of thought, much less 100 or 1,000 hours to really see how these systems work.
Yeah, and I think it really does all boil down to money, unfortunately, and politics and who's backed by who, and so it gets real messy real fast. But I do think that eventually there's going to be enough evidence out there, which is why I enjoy writing about it so much and just trying to get a new narrative going. But yeah, it's just going to take time.
So in your book, I know that it's always a team effort to get something like this done. Who are some of your most important contributors that helped you get this story out and get it finished?
Yeah, well, I have to say thank you to Billy Gannon, who came up with the original idea. Very thankful for him not giving up on the idea initially. And, really each contributor was just a huge encouragement to me that they wanted to participate. They took the time to share their story. That they're all still working in this space and making a difference. And it really was a collaborative effort. I don't know. I mean, yeah, each contributor was amazing to work with. And I have to say thank you to my husband, who was very encouraging to me as well when I was, you get into a project and it's like, what am I doing? I don't know. I don't know what's going on. How is this going to be received? So he was a big encouragement to me.
You guys, I mean, I think you and Lee definitely fit into the Bitcoin power couples mold. And then recently as well, we saw Sam Callahan's gonna be on the podcast as well, and he and Natalie just became a Bitcoin power couple. I actually learned a term last night, which you might laugh at me for just having discovered this, but WAGs,
Oh,
the
just last
wife.
night is when you heard about that. Okay.
I had to ask my wife. I said, "What does WAGs mean?" And she said, "Wives and girlfriends." How did you not know that? Uh, what do you think? For those power couples where, maybe the wives and girlfriends aren't quite as public, they aren't writing their own books or hosting podcasts. What do you think? What do you think the role is for them? Because we all know that behind any great man is an equally or greater great woman. What do you think their role is in helping us get the message out?
I mean, I think first of all, like my just 2 cents would be for them to get or to educate themselves, like to take interest in it, because it is super boring at first. If you don't get it, it's like I don't want to talk about crypto. I do not care. My husband and I were out the other night, and there's a table next to us who was being super loud. It was one guy, and he was just talking about crypto. Like, the women at the table were like, please stop. And I just had to laugh because it's like I see that happen so many times. And it's a give and take for sure. But yeah, my 2 cents would just be get involved. Just go to one conference, go to one meetup or something, talk to the other 2 or 3 women who are there, and make a friend, because it really is a welcoming environment, and it's a fun space to be part of. So I've had all good experiences.
What is there any piece in particular that you're working on right now to help move the narrative forward, or something that's kind of near and dear to your heart right now that you are working on getting the message out about?
I'll just repeat myself like over and over again. I really am passionate about the green energy, just aspect of it. Trying to find any story I can. I love hearing just personal stories about how Bitcoin has changed people's lives, whether they're in this space or not. heard a lot of great things from friends or acquaintances about people who have been able to buy a house with, the Bitcoin that they saved, or, you know, whatever the asset might be. It's just really cool to see how it's changing people's lives.
One of my favorite stories that I heard early on that kind of, really not got me over the hump, but really showed me how impactful this can be in a real sense on energy systems was actually in Texas, and it was about a proposal to add on several $billion worth of peaker plants, so extra gas generation that didn't end up being needed because Bitcoin miners were flexible enough. Um, Whether in Texas specifically or in the U.S. or even just around the world, are there any kind of really cool energy stories that are sparking your interest right now?
I'm always on the hunt for more. I have a couple of conversations coming up to dive deeper into that, so I don't really want to talk about it quite yet because I don't feel like I'm educated enough to spill the beans. But yeah, I mean, honestly, if you have tips, please send them my way because I feel like most people, I'm still learning, and I'm always on the hunt for a very feel good story about Bitcoin and energy because they don't really exist yet. That's yeah, working
I
on that.
know, I know. For me, it was a mix of things for sure, and the gridless guys in Kenya and the resulting content that came out from the work that they're doing was a huge mover for me. And it's really cool when it's not just a technical story, but it's a very emotional story about what kind of impact that it actually has on people's lives. I mean, not to toot our own horn, but our goal as a company is to lower the cost of energy for the Pacific Northwest, and we think Bitcoin mining is the tool to do it. And that's just from being a flexible load on the grid, which is a similar story to how Texans were able to save billions of dollars on additional generation that they didn't need just because they had a flexible load on the grid. But you mentioned Vespine and landfill gas, and there's so many different ways to get into it. Every story has its own intricate kind of way that it's impacting a community. I was actually talking to our advisor yesterday, and he talked about a sovereign nation up in Canada that is a native tribe. They have their own energy generation. They don't need to use banks because Bitcoin is their form of money. They use the heat from their mining facilities to actually heat greenhouses and grow food in the winter. This whole circular economy that essentially just lets them disconnect and detach from any other kind of system. I mean, that's the most sovereign thing that I've heard probably in the last year,
Yeah,
and
and that's in Canada.
that's in Canada.
Okay, that's pretty
Happy to
crazy.
to connect you. I don't know what the name of the tribe is, but that might be a really cool story to highlight. And it's definitely, I mean, it's just an example of one, the power that this gives people who otherwise may not have a clear and easy way to live on their own with their own resources, but now do. But also just shows how powerful this can be as a resource. I mean, a large part of their income is just what they make from mining because they have their own sovereign energy source. So it changes the incentives of how they need to either tax their community or set up other economic development initiatives. It really kind of puts the whole thing on easy mode as long as they can get that initial capacity set up to perform this action. But that is probably the coolest story that I've heard recently that I want to dig into, and
Yeah.
maybe it's more for you to dig into since we're working on our own stuff.
Yes, I would love to dig into that. That's a very cool story. I recently, I'm sure everybody heard about Bhutan too, using hydroelectricity to mine, and I don't know, that was pretty cool too.
I hope we see more of those stories, and maybe one of the coolest things about Bhutan that came out was not only are they doing it, but they've been doing it for the better part of a decade now, and nobody knew about it. I mean, that to me is the real story. Is like how many other small nations are already doing this, and they're just a little bit better at keeping the secret, and we
Which
haven't
is
been told
really the
about
way
it.
to go. I mean, yeah, that's a
There's
very good point.
there's no, I mean, as far as I know, there's no real benefit to publicly announcing you're doing this. Otherwise, the difficulty of the network's just going to go up.
Yeah, I mean, I think raising money for another round is kind of the only reason to announce what you're doing. Other than that, yeah, much better to keep it private. So,
Um, yeah, I know that we're going to keep on getting these stories, and it's only going to get more interesting. But it's crazy how many different areas of our lives it can touch, and maybe one of the most important is that not only does it get people's financial sovereignty in order, but especially if you're in a northern climate, just the heat reuse from mining can really enhance your food sovereignty. um, Food deserts are something that don't go talked about quite as much, but the ability for people to get fresh food in their communities, especially in northern climates, is severely limited in the winter, and most people don't have access to fresh food and don't have the kind of nutrition that they need. So that's one of the things that I would love to see happen more often.
yeah, no, that's a very good point. Uh, I do think Bitcoin's going to continue to evolve into these little, or not little, but these subcultures of a circular economy of what you were talking about earlier. I mean, it's just impossible for it not to. It just makes so much sense.
Are there any, I mean, there's a million stories, but are there any in particular that you think have not been talked about enough? Some of these downstream impacts that are really interesting, but maybe haven't gotten the attention that they need.
I keep coming back to it, but I really would love to continue telling personal stories of women who have kind of come out on the other side of either, an abusive relationship and not being able to get out based on finances, and then being able to hold your own private money and how that can change your whole life. I really want to keep telling those stories because I think that globally, like you really like that was really what got me into like wanting to dive deep into Bitcoin. Is it just makes perfect sense. Like there's no other way to explain it. So that's really what I'm focused on. Is just and it's hard to get your publicist, your editor, like everyone on board with some stories just because they are so personal. So finding a way to tell them, in the right way at the right time is very important and also kind of challenging. So
Are there any, I know there are, but who would you point to as kind of examples for women to go out and find who have already shared their stories and can serve as kind of a template for people to model on whether it's providing more access or just upskilling their way of being in the world and actually uh, you know having a little bit more power in their lives.
I mean, I think the biggest one that I can think of right now is the Human Rights Foundation is a great place to start. There's a lot of great ambassadors, I guess, on their platform that are great role models as far as just like learning about how to get started and where to go from there. But I mean, I would think that if you reach out to a Bitcoiner, show up at a meetup, and you try to learn more about it, people are willing to help. Everyone's very excited to get another Bitcoiner in. So there's also that.
You mentioned that a lot of your kind of initial impetus for getting into this and really learning about it was for your girls, for your young girls, and how you could teach them to navigate their world and understand their world. For other people who are raising children and looking for ways to teach them more effectively, what are some of the things that you've found to be most helpful in helping them gain these important skills and perspectives?
I would say they're pretty young right now, so what we do is really try to teach them the value of like cost and what money is, and why it's important to work hard. And we're definitely not the best parents, but we do our best. And just want to teach them to have a great work ethic, because I think if you can have a great work ethic and you have a heart to help people, you're going to figure it out eventually. So those are kind of the two things we focus on, and we'll introduce actual like Bitcoin, info later on. They know what Bitcoin is, but they don't really, they're too young to like fully understand it. So
I know for me personally, I feel like the deeper that I got into Bitcoin, the more it changed kind of some of my attitudes around work and some of these very fundamental ways that we show up in the world. Has it been a similar story for you? Do you feel like you've changed any or improved upon any of your kind of personal qualities of navigating the world?
I think Bitcoin is a really cool tool that kind of aligns with some of the beliefs and way of living that my like husband and I have already felt. It was just nice to have this added tool kind of come alongside that. But I think one of the ways that it has changed my opinion is I was definitely more well, I don't really know how to say this, but like more like left leaning, like pretty far left, and I just wanted change, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think once I've learned more about money and more about Bitcoin, it's helped. I'm more moderate now, and I really want policies that are going to grow Bitcoin and create a safe environment for crypto to grow, whatever that looks like. I don't know, but I think it's just kind of it's kind of helped me feel more like, oh, okay, here's a way to actually make some of those things happen that I had wanted. So,
It's a long and winding road to get into this, and it often takes us years and hundreds of hours. If you had any advice for your younger self, just discovering this and just getting into it, what would you tell your younger self?
probably to listen to my friend in 2013 when she told me about it, to take it seriously. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think everybody has their life to live and your own path to take. So it all ends up, you always end up where you're supposed to be. But yeah, probably just to like take her a little bit more seriously.
Totally agree with that. There's
Yeah.
there's no accidents in my opinion, and I agree that we all get in at the price that we deserve. So
Yeah.
there were plenty of opportunities that many of us had early on, myself included, to get it, to not spend a couple Bitcoin on something like a VPN subscription, and hold generational wealth. But you know what? Those early learning experiences sometimes galvanize us to be much more active later on.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, as we get toward the end of this, I want to make sure that you've got an opportunity to share any kind of like final thoughts or takeaways that you hope people are internalizing from this, as well as, the big idea for you and why you're working on this so passionately.
Yeah, I mean, I think just continue to get involved, go to a meetup, go to a conference, read a book, listen to a podcast, whatever your capacity is. But I think you can't go wrong getting involved in Bitcoin because it really does change your outlook on the world. And I mean, I'm excited. There's just so many stories to tell and so many different means to make that a reality. So yeah, I mean, it's just a really exciting time. I'm glad that it's becoming more talked about. Even though it's kind of sad that our world is the way that it is, so that we do have to talk about Bitcoin more. But it's okay. It's the same. It's exciting at the same time. So.
If people want to keep up with what you're writing, whether it's for Forbes or another outlet, how can they find your content and how can they keep up with you personally to see anything that you're working on?
Yeah, LinkedIn is a great place to connect with me. I'm on, Becca Bratcher. I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm on X, although sometimes I'm not on very often. Just depends. So probably LinkedIn, or you can follow me on Forbes or The Street on my page there.
Wonderful. Well, we appreciate you sharing your time with us and really appreciate all the work that you do, making sure that this is accessible to the larger half of the world and in many ways the better half of the world, through all the women who are going to be exposed to your work. And thank you for supporting your husband as well. You guys both have such an impact in your own way. And I love to see everything that comes out. In many ways, you guys leading the vanguard in Texas for the rest of us to just encourage you from the sidelines and really follow in your footsteps. So appreciate all the leadership you guys provide. And thanks for sharing your time and your perspective with the audience.
Well, right back at you. Thanks for having me on and for the work that y'all are doing, and looking forward to seeing you in Texas. So keep it up.
Love it.